Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. I'm here with Pamela Gupta, my cybersecurity co-conspirator. I would love for you just introduce yourself, Pam, and we'll introduce the topic that we want to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So great to be here. My name is Pamela Gupta. I'm a cybersecurity strategist and a technologist. So I really enjoy both aspects of bringing those components together in what I do. And looking forward to this conversation, Debbie.
Right. So I, just like you, I'm a technologist, but my interest or my domain is data privacy. And Pam and I have talked about this a couple of times, and I'm excited to have this conversation with her because uh, there's a fight, I guess. I don't know. I think people just make these things up, but I really don't understand why people sort of don't understand the difference between cybersecurity and privacy. And maybe we can talk about that a bit. I can just tell you my experience. I know a lot of people, like some companies, when they say that they're talking about cybersecurity, they sort of wrap privacy in that sometimes, whereas these are two different domains, and I think people have very narrow views. I mean, to me, they're both very broad topics. They have very narrow views of both, and sometimes they can confuse one for the other. So I would love to hear your thoughts. I can tell you my thought about what I think the differences are between cybersecurity and privacy, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So the way I see the difference and what they are, so data privacy I see as more of data and who has the right to own it and right to view it, right of ownership, right? That's the data privacy side. So what is information? What is the data? And whose is it? And who should have authorized access to it? Cybersecurity is the way these dovetail into each other is because cybersecurity can controls can help identify what is that data and that needs to be protected and provide the right controls to whether it's authorized access, who should have access, what is the technology for keeping privacy data confidential, such as through encryption, et cetera, bring in the technical controls as well as the process control. So it's really about identifying, helping the cybersecurity can help identify, do that right data classification so that information is protected to the level it needs protection. And then, I'll just give an example. Let's just take GDPR, for instance, because that's very much in everybody's scope of
Mm-hmm.
regulation right now, or
Mm-hmm.
it is something that touches you in some shape or form. So the way GDPR defines privacy and security of that data. So if we just take even a very big aspect of GDPR, which is consent, that when you have data of a user of a European resident, for instance, what is the consent required from that individual in collecting their data? That consent is related to privacy. It has nothing to do with cybersecurity, right? So that's a completely different domain. So there are so many aspects, such as what is that data that you're collecting that is under GDPR? How are you going to process it? Are you only processing it for the intent that you convey? All that is under privacy. And we, as cybersecurity professionals, have to make sure that there's the right data classification of that around the organization. So we would collaborate with the privacy owners, privacy stakeholders in the organization, and then identify what are the cybersecurity controls we need to put in place and do the process mapping and the flow mapping of where is that data being created in the organization, how is it coming in, what systems does it reside on, who has access to it, um, what are the technical controls. Again, I talked about encryption in the past. That's a very important part of it. And also the data retention policies, so it's a very collaborative effort, but it is not either privacy or cybersecurity. It's a combination of both.
Yes. I had told someone that privacy and cybersecurity have a symbiotic relationship, and someone was like really upset with me that I said that. So they kind of said, well, you can't have privacy without cybersecurity. And to me, it's like, you can't compare them that way because to me, they're different. Like, they're very different. They do work together, but they're not the same thing. So trying to make one, you know, one bigger or different. I mean, they're different. So, an analogy I like to talk about is like, let's say you have a bank. So you have a bank, and let's say cybersecurity. You're responsible for, the exterior protection, the interior protection of the bank. Who's in and out of the bank, who has access to, the assets in the bank, things like that. But to me, data privacy is about what's in the vault, like who has access to certain things in the vault, like what are the rights of the people who have assets in that bank. So to me, it's more granular in a way in terms of what you're looking for, and it is about the right of the individual, and also the legal aspects of what companies need to do so that they do not trample on the rights of the individual. So that's why it works together. Also, privacy is as a right existed way before technology, and it will continue because we have rights to privacy in a lot of things, right? So you have, your home, you have a right to privacy. You don't have a house, hopefully, this made out of glass. So people can, look into your house or whatever. So to me, that's about privacy. So you have locks on your door. That may be cybersecurity, but if you live in a glass house, someone can look in, or you want them to, or you don't want them to. To me, that's sort of about privacy. So being able to know the difference is really important. And I feel like, I have tons of friends in both domains, and I love to talk with, all those folks. So I don't limit myself to just the privacy folks or the cybersecurity folks. I feel like we learn so much from one another because we're all, even though, like, for example, I may not be doing cyber work because I know it's so closely related to what I'm doing, or it's tangential in some way. I need to understand like those process and procedures, and also know, when I need to call someone like you in. Say, okay, Pam, this is your domain. This is, what you're really good at. So I sort of know what I know and know what I don't know, and to be able to get the right people in place.
Yes, so I agree with you that privacy is really about rights, right? This is private information. This is information that I don't want to share, or if you are going to share it, because I don't have control once it goes into a business, then having laws and regulations such as GDPR to enforce that right so that the businesses are taking it seriously, they would need cybersecurity professionals to put those right controls in place. So yeah, absolutely. It's about rights and it's about protection of that data is on the other side is what my side of the house would do. But I think it's important to talk about a couple of the current scenario, of how, this right that we have for privacy, um, you know, how do we make sure that we have that right? We want to have that right, but do we have that right? I mean, that's the biggest concern I have right now. And that kind of talks to, even with COVID-19, for instance, the surveillance for uh, social distancing, for example, some of the technology that is being going to be put in place or has been put in place. How do we do that security and privacy by design when we are putting in measures for whether it is for controlling the spread of the virus, or for controlling the virus, or for identifying who is infected, for instance? So I think this is something that is of extreme importance and a critical requirement right now to engage the right stakeholders who can be involved in when these projects are being set up, whether it's by the Googles and the Androids of the world, or the smaller companies, such as in my adjoining town, for instance. they had brought in drones to to kind of view in public areas how close people were to each other, take their even temperature from far, and also if they were coughing, for instance, if they were exhibiting any signs of being infected by COVID-19. So that what became a very large privacy issue. And here's an example of where if we have security and privacy by design, then it does not have to become a, a botted project, which is pretty much what they had to do. They had to pull back out after making all that investment in the technology, spending so much time rolling it out, um, and manpower and man hours or woman hours, whatever that might be. But so much time and resources wasted. There was a hue and cry about it, and then they had to pull it out. But I challenge that. If they had right privacy and security by design right from the get go, they would have a different story to tell, right? We are collecting this information. This is who has access to it. This is how we are protecting it, right? If you have those reassurances for the citizens or for whoever is asking those questions, why this project had to be shut down, then they could have a better story to tell. They could have gone further and achieved their objectives, right? In the previous talk, we talked about helping organizations achieve their vision or the intended outcomes. That's how this comes in. That's how we work together as privacy and security professionals to make these projects come to fruition. Because if we had the right controls in place and we were very clear that this data was being anonymized, and these are our practices of how we are doing this, we are not storing any information. If we see an alert condition, then this is what we will do. Again, just a small example of my local town, what they did, how they rolled out a project for surveillance for COVID-19 with the right intent, right? But it got shot down. And then that's just a very, very small example, but that is the value of the right of that data. If we can prove from the get-go who has the right to that data, what is that data, is that being collected, who has access to it, we can really make a lot of strides in having the intended outcomes.
Absolutely. And I think contact tracing or COVID-19 is opening up so many different new areas where harm can be dealt to the individual. Because, as you say, if these technologies aren't rolled out the right way, it may be a full stop because you really think through the rights of the individual, the security of the data. All those things have to be really thought through. And for me, actually, I have another example. This happened in the UK, I believe, when they were trying to roll out their COVID app. They had done all this work. They rolled out the app, and then they said, "Well, we didn't do like a data privacy impact assessment." And that when you're dealing with creating a new application or rolling stuff out, those are the types of things you really need to do beforehand or in parallel at least, so that you're not getting into trouble. So because of that, they had to really pull back on that program. And I think some other countries are having the same things because not every country, obviously the EU has a stronger regime, but in Australia, they had to pass actually new legislation before they put out their COVID app, because they realized that some of the things that they were asking or things they were doing they didn't really have laws to cover that. And so we're in this new frontier where we're, as you said, we're rolling out all these new technologies, the Internet of Things, these new capabilities on cell phones to do this tracking and tracing, and it's getting so far ahead of the law. There's nothing wrong with that because the inventions often precede any regulation a lot of times, but sometimes people are trampling on kind of existing regulations, or really they don't understand you know these are the parameters that you have to deal with, and the data, just because it's so easy for you to get it doesn't mean that it belongs to you. You are there to to secure the rights of the individual because they're literally loaning you the data for you to use for your purpose, but you still have a obligation to be able to protect that data and make sure that you're not trampling on the rights of the individual. And it's important that businesses need to be able to actually do business. So, I would be sad if I had a client that spent a lot of time and money to put investment into a new technology and then couldn't really be able to use it or be able to sell it if they hadn't taken those steps.
Right. I agree with you that the way the means for integrating security and privacy by design is doing that privacy impact assessment, a risk assessment. And truth be told, there isn't going to be regulation for any and everything that needs to be protected. And that's where a risk based program is extremely, extremely important because even if there isn't a regulation or a label around it, some of it does come down to risk and can be easily identified by doing that risk assessment. So I'll give you an example. Wall Street had done a study on about, and they found about 15 applications, 15 apps that very much are common apps that are people are installing on their phones, for example, that were collecting a lot of private information, but it's not regulated or it's not classified. So this is not social security number. What the kind of data they were collecting is how much have you exercised, even things such as the amount of sexual activity the person had. So really private information, but there is nothing that no classifier for those kind of data sets. And these applications were uploading this information to Facebook, even if you were not a Facebook customer.
Mm.
You were still, that information was still being shared with a third party, which was nowhere being called out in the app, and nobody would even know because if it's in a EULA, which is like 80 pages long, no, people are not even going to read it. But those are the kind of things that will come back and bite the bottom line of a business when it is uncovered, because people are not interested in sharing private information just because it hasn't been classified. I know businesses, they struggle even if it is classified and they have to deal with regulations. There are so many violations that we see. Forget about when it is not even classified. So some of it is going to be, I would say, almost like common sense. But if it's not, then really they need to do a integration of security and privacy by design, and which by its very nature means that doing that risk assessment, looking at, okay, if even if we are collecting this data, this should be extremely, extremely restricted, and by no means should we be sharing it where it can be used by a third party who has absolutely no no business in gathering this data. So why are they even in place, these connections that are even possible, right? Between an app which has nothing to do with Facebook, and they're sending this data out to Facebook,
Wow,
for
that's
example.
amazing. I don't know. I mean, I know people feel like ethics is a dirty word and it's hard to mention it in this vein. Unfortunately, not all laws are ethical and not all technology is ethical. But I think, you know, companies, in my view, I feel like there's going to be a trust war starting, where people are going to be very more choosy about how they share their data with different companies, and the companies that people end up trusting or need to trust, they're going to get the lion's share of the data because people feel like they're going to secure it in a certain way. So I feel like we're heading a turning point where I feel like before COVID-19, people weren't not enough people were interested in taking action on their personal privacy, where I feel like now those issues are more top of mind. And I feel like people start to get the clue that, maybe the type of data sharing they were doing before is not great. And maybe they want to shore up, their personal data sharing so that they're not uh, using apps that are taking their data and sharing it with other third parties. So I think that'll be interesting. And I think because of things like biometrics and facial recognition, if someone steals your fingerprint or your, iris scan and they're opening bank accounts and stuff, that could be absolutely disastrous for an individual if you have that stuff stolen. So, those, to me, those issues, they play heavily on both cybersecurity and privacy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, biometrics and surveillance data, which has become part and parcel of some countries, very nature for dealing with things. We certainly heard of the biometrics data being collected and being used in China, for instance, but even in countries in the Western world, right, where UK, for example, they have a law where you cannot click on a terrorist link, or if you're watching a YouTube for more than 5 minutes or something which has terrorist content, that you can be penalized for that, or the very fact that somebody can be detected means that they are doing some kind of surveillance there for who's watching what, for example. Um, so there is a very, very big brother kind of a mentality which has existed in the U.S., of course, the big Snowden showdown, which is still having repercussions to this day, although I'm not a huge fan of what he did, but I just think that some of the facts that he revealed are extremely important. But that just goes down, I think, back to that circle of rights. What are the rights we have? What are the rights we think we have?
Right.
Because of the big brother mentality, or I haven't heard of the big sister mentality, so I won't talk about that. But there is that whole concept of, I don't have anything to hide.
Right.
uh, that kind of mindset will not get us through now anymore,
No.
because we do have a lot at stake. If you are, and we can maybe talk about in the next segment of Revi about some of the processing, some of the data collection, but then is the processing of that data. How is that? Why is that so important to know what your data is being processed for, and what are what you were told and what is being done with that data? And then the third parties, right? Who is it being shared with? I think we can easily talk more into, give more examples as to why that can be a problematic behavior today.
I agree. That's a whole topic unto itself, especially because people just have no, most people, the average person has no clue, like what happens to their data, who's using it, what's happening with it, just have no clue. So that's a very good thing to talk about, especially we have so many devices that are recording us and listening and doing different things. So we need to really be able to dig into that topic and talk about it. And there are going to be some big changes coming up soon with third parties, especially with the Apple iOS 14 uh, 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 what's the security patch update to their iOS that we can talk about as well. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This is always fun and fascinating. I'm happy that we're able to share this information. I'm really happy with this video because I think, there's so much misunderstanding about privacy and cybersecurity. So I think that this is pretty clear, at least in my view, about telling what the differences are and how they work together.
Yes, how they provide value together, as opposed to one and not the other.
Exactly, exactly. Love it, love it. Well, thank you so much, Pamela. I love this session, and we'll be back next time. Bye.